All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Learning Revolution Thrive in an EDU show. I am the host, Rachelle Dene Poth. Excited today to talk with many different people about podcasting, the use of podcasts, benefits for educators, for students, you name it. So we'll have a great conversation here today with my guests, and I will let them all introduce themselves. Just to tell you about me quickly, I'm a Spanish and STEAM teacher, also an attorney and an author. Love learning, love having the opportunity to get some guests here each week to talk about different topics in education. So I am excited to have Dan, Scott, and Sarah here today. And so I will kick it over to Dan to give us an introduction of what he does, where he's from, and all that good stuff.
Thank you. By day, first of all, I'm Dr. Dan Kreiness. By day, I am an ELA instructional coach at the middle school level in Connecticut. By night, I am an education podcaster. I host the Leader of Learning podcast. And within that podcast, I co-host with Rachelle a monthly series now called Devil's Advocate, where we tackle trending topics in education.
Yeah, and I'm excited for being part of that podcast after we had our first episode. A good conversation. Looking forward to our next one coming up. So thanks for joining in today. And next, I will go to Sarah.
Hi, Rachelle. Thanks for having me. I'm Sarah Johnson. I live in the northwestern part of Wisconsin. I am a former classroom teacher, 6 through 12 English teacher, and building principal. I'm currently the host of the In Awe podcast. I'm an author, an educational consultant, a leadership coach, and an adjunct professor for individuals who are looking to become titled leaders. And I'm really excited to talk podcasts because it's become one of my very favorite things on the planet for the last 2 years.
Yeah, and it sounds like I've noticed a trend so far that everybody keeps really busy doing a lot of different things, a lot of different titles, a lot of different activities and involvement. So thank you for joining us today. And finally, on to you, Scott.
Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Nunes. I'm out of Modesto, California, a former ELA teacher turned tech coach this year. And I have two podcasts, Education Today and the TNT EdTech podcast, which I co-host with my buddy Matthew. And Rachelle has been the only guest that we've had on twice. So I'm excited to be here. I'm not sure if Rachelle knew that, but kudos to her.
I think I did. I think I remember the second time that you brought that up, and I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't know if that got me a prize or anything. No, just kidding.
Yeah, maybe some stickers.
Some stickers are good, right? Everybody's always a fan. I think there are I think 3 podcasts that I've been on twice. Yours, Dr. Will's, and I just blanked on the other one. That's kind of funny. It'll come back to me. So anyway, we're going to talk all things about podcasts. I have my own podcast that I started a year ago. I wasn't really sure what I would talk about. I thought about doing it for so long. And then one day back in September at school, I thought, okay, I guess I'll just give this a go and see what happens. So every Monday I had an episode coming out, and I have a conversation with myself and then joke that I don't know what my next topic will be about. But it's typically something that I've read or been in a conversation or something I've learned at a webinar or something to that effect. And then I just think about it. And so it became, for me, a really good way to reflect, but also to kind of put some information out there, what I was learning, questions that I had. Even though I ask anybody like, hey, if you want to be a guest on my podcast, let me know. I haven't really had any takers yet, but that's okay. So this is, I guess, season 2 coming up, but excited to learn from all of you today. So let's kick it off with a general question. And any of you could answer this, all of you can answer this. Why podcasts? Like, why should teachers either listen to podcasts, have students do podcasts? I mean, what is it about podcasts?
May I start then?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, podcasting, the way I run mine is about story. And I just think that we love story. Our brains are wired for story. And I think that we learn so well when we're listening to the narrative of someone else. I also believe that the connection of voice, it's different than picking up a book for learning or a video or any other mode that would be anything other than what my podcast anyway is, which is purely auditory. And I just feel like there's such a deep connection that listeners can gain from whether it's the host or the guest and the host or whatever. And I think that's important. I think we crave connection. So for me, it really comes down to just being able to amplify as many incredible guests that I can have and connect through story and through voice.
Yeah, I love that answer. Yeah,
sorry,
Dan.
just to piggyback off, and I think Sarah took sort of the content creation side of it. And I think that as a podcaster, I think in terms of creating content, it's still about like your own personal learning. Some podcasters like you, Rachelle, and I think Scott sometimes go at it solo, and they host their own show and it's just them, or at least sometimes they do solo episodes, and sometimes you bring on guests. For me, like 95% of my episodes have been interview style, and it's just amazing how much I'm still able to learn producing the podcast, talking to some of the greatest minds in education. And then on the flip side, from a content consumption side, I'm hoping obviously to put out content that not only am I proud of and that can highlight the guests that I bring on, or in our case, Rachelle, as co-host, when we do our Devil's Advocate, really bringing some really relevant and great topics to the listeners, and having them learn as much as possible from the content that we're sharing.
Yeah, I definitely enjoy the conversations, just to think about the different sides of it. And I think that's one thing that I really like about podcasts is you hear all the different perspectives, and it's a great way to learn and listen, especially if you say like, I don't have time to go to a conference. I don't have time to sit down and read a book. Like just being able to still be active. I mean, I go for a walk most mornings, not so much now with school back in session, but that's when I listen to a lot of podcasts, and it's really refreshing to be able to do that and to feel like I'm still learning, growing personally and professionally, and practicing self-care because I'm out taking a walk too. So Scott, did you have anything there to add?
I think a lot of it's been said. For me, the biggest piece has honestly been the professional development piece. While I love creating content and sharing, the most fulfilling part of being a podcaster and maintaining the podcast is the PD that I receive from the guests that I have on. Just having on high profile guests, and I learned so much. It really is like bringing the conference to me, and then I get to ask the questions that I want to ask. It's an amazing experience. It's way better than any university course I've ever attended. Not to put down any of my professors. They were great and they prepared me for what I'm doing now, but it's totally different. It's much more experiential, and I like that.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. And it's funny, as you were talking, the third the third name finally came to me when I said, oh wait, I just lost it. Andrew Willock, Coffee with a Geek, had one. And I think Dr. Will and Andrew's podcast, I think, and Vicki Davis were the first three that I had been on. And that's probably been, I bet 3 years ago now. And just interesting just to think back to, I was like, what's a podcast? What am I going to say on a podcast? And what kind of questions? But they were all so different. I mean, really unique, the take on them. Andrew, for example, has at the end, he has this wheel and he spins and just does like really quick questions for you. I've been on one where you had to pick like this or that thing. And it's really funny because you don't know what they're going to ask. And for me, a lot of the times I can't pick one of those two things. So it makes for a really good discussion, but I don't know.
I was just thinking too, to come at it from a different angle, and I'm wondering if Sarah might be able to speak to this even better than any of us can. Sometimes if educators or people in general are already in business of whether it's consulting or being an author or having some kind of business, a podcast can be a great way to market that business, but at the very least, spread the message that someone is trying to spread through their brand. And, I think regardless of who you are and why you start your podcast, one of the things that we've realized, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I think in the process is that it is your brand. It's kind of like your baby, and whether or not you have an LLC taken out on it, it's like a business. And creating the content and being proud of it and being on brand, they're all things that are actually really important to keep in mind as you're creating it.
Yeah. And one thing that I'll say too, that it's interesting. I mean, there are some people that have the podcast and there's a distinct kind of feature, focus, look, aspect, whatever to it. And when I was on a podcast with, it was a couple months ago with these guys from the UK, and they said, well, what's your podcast about? And what are your guests like? I'm like, well, the guest is me. And the topics range from, and it's just a big list. And I really like that just because it gives me a chance to think about a lot of different things. But in that same token, a lot of the ones that I do listen to, all of yours, for example, or going back, it's nice to know a focus of somebody on their specific podcast. Like if you're looking for, I don't know, like the balance, like I was on Caitlin Tucker's, or if you're looking for some quick teacher tips and ideas throughout the week. I mean, Vicki Davis, that's the one, like I said, one of the ones I'd started on. And it's nice to at least have a direction to go in, because there are so many podcasts out there. And if anybody's thinking about starting one, you need all of that equipment, right? I don't have any. That was kind of a trick question a little bit.
Yeah,
but,
I know. You gave us a zinger there. No,
I
you really
know.
don't need much. Now, I started out with a bit, but I kind of knew I was in it for the long haul. And I would say don't invest in it unless you're sure. It's okay to kind of sample the waters a little bit before you commit. And the mic that you're seeing right here, I got this for $69. It's not a ton of money, and that's basically it. And I already had some good headphones. That's basically all you need to get started to have a higher quality podcast, but you can start with your phone. Just minimize the outside noise.
I wanted to piggyback really quickly on Dan had said that maybe I could speak to this about branding. And it's so funny because up to the very minute I started this podcast, I still considered myself to be only an educator. And I think for the longest time, I had a hard time even saying I was an author. Rachelle, you led and you said you're an author. So I'm like, well, I'm going to say I'm an author too. I have 2 books out there. I mean, it's not something that I have easily identified with. And honestly, for me, the podcast was just one of like 3 prongs of a major passion of mine, which was to amplify women. Because to be honest, I becoming a speaker and all of these things, you didn't see as much representation even 2 years ago that you may now in terms of diversity with gender and ethnicity and all of that on panels and everything. So really it was like, and being a principal, there's 25% of females at the high school level, and that's where I was at. And striving to become a superintendent, we even have less than that. And so for me, my podcast was really driven to say, hey, this is how I'm going to take a piece of what I see as an issue and fill it. I'm going to fill that, and I'm going to amplify women. And it's just been this incredible journey. So it's really kind of interesting because the branding, I mean, I've had to listen to conversations with Dan and other people who talk about that to help me grow that in my own heart and in my mind. So it can be really used as a great tool when you have those pieces. But for me, they've all kind of like the road has just all kind of converged there by accident, like serendipitously. I don't know how else to put it, because they all kind of started around the same time for me. The podcast published Balance Like a Pirate just like, 5 months before that, have another book out since. But I guess what I wanted to be able to say about equipment, if I had not just said, okay, I'm not going to try to make this perfect. I'm going to just do it. And it's going to sound not the same way the first episode as it will 20 episodes from now. I'm not going to get the perfect equipment to start. I just need to do it and click publish. If I hadn't done that, we wouldn't be to the point where I've amplified. I'm getting up to my 100th episode soon, and I'm super excited. And the world wouldn't have all of those incredible stories that they've hit. And so getting back to that, Scott's exactly right. I mean, even if you're not going to do it on your phone, there's so many free tools, easy tools. I want to reference Jennifer Gonzalez has an incredible episode and a blog post about how to start a podcast. I think we've all seen different articles, and I think we have a good group of people who have put them out themselves. But that one, just to me, is like, I read it after, I'm going, well, that would have been good to read before I started. So it kind of gives you a lot of the nitty gritty, but it actually doesn't take a ton, which is surprising.
There's a podcast that I like to listen to, and it's about podcasting. It's kind of weird to think about, but it's called The School of Podcasting by Dave Jackson. And I was just listening to an episode he did. It was released within the last couple of days. I listened to it this morning, and he talks about Tyler Perry. And how podcasters and content creators need to think like Tyler Perry, who, by the way, just became another Black billionaire. One of the few. So I think that's a really awesome accomplishment. But Tyler Perry talks about super serving your niche, like your niche audience. And, us educators, obviously we are creating our podcast for other educators. But to keep in mind who you're speaking to, who's listening to your podcast is really important. It's kind of like, Scott mentioned, he's a former ELA teacher. I'm an ELA guy. And it's like when you're teaching students to write and you're asking them to consider their audience, that's what you have to do as a podcaster too. You can't just get in the microphone and start rambling on and on without understanding not only what you're talking about, but also who you're talking to.
Yeah, great points that you all made. And just going back a little bit to what Scott said about, like, even on your phone, I know that when I was doing mine, I actually was using, the first one I used, I think, was Go Synth. And that was what changed. It used to be called Recap. And I used that just for speaking assessments for my students in Spanish. And then it changed to be Go Synth. And so I still use that with my Spanish students. But we also use that to connect with students in Argentina and also in Spain, just to have this space where they could just talk about, like, life. It was limited to 256 seconds, I think, at the time. Could also have video, but that was kind of my first entry point into creating a podcast. And I think the first time that I did that, I used Synth and then recorded like 3 or 4 of those 256-second clips. And then I found Anchor. And then I upload them into Anchor the first time. And then I thought, okay, well, I probably should just do this in Anchor. I had not used it on my phone. And I remember taking a walk one day. I'm like, this is really awesome, because you can walk. I mean, for me, when I go, I always walk, like I said, and I'm either thinking because I'm talking out loud and I'm writing a blog and I'm putting all of the text into the phone, and I come back and it's in a document, and then book's written. All right. Not quite. Or I'm listening to a podcast, or in some cases, like recording bits of a podcast. So it is nice that you have something that is free, that is not trying to figure out. I mean, there are high-end tools that you can use and a lot of the different equipment. But for me, it's usually this headset that you're looking at right now on my phone or just on my computer with Anchor. And it is so easy to get started doing that. And for any teachers that are out there looking to get started as well, it's not like you need to invest in a lot of things. And Synth, Anchor, I highly recommend. What about for any of you? What was your first like entry point into podcasting, or first tool? Or
So I use a company called Spreaker to host my podcast. And what's great about Spreaker, and this is why I recommend it for educators as well, Anchor is great and it is completely free. But another option might be Spreaker, because they also have a free option, but you're limited to basically storage space. What's cool about Spreaker is that you can move up in terms of upgrading your subscription, which I've done. So I started on the free plan, then I went a little bit more into it, and now I'm much more into it. But they also have what they call Spreaker Studio. And it's like a mini recording studio that you can either use the web-based version or get as an actual download on your computer. And you could really produce an entire show, minus maybe some editing if you want to do that sort of thing. But sound effects and music and, having different guests on and recording all of that within their studio. So for me, that was one of the things that drew me in. And like I said, it was free. It was like a freemium, right? It was free at first. And then if you want to keep going with it and get more involved, which I've done, then you could start paying more and more.
Sarah or Scott?
Go ahead, Scott.
Okay. For me, I started with Anchor just because I went to a conference and they showed how it was as easy as 3 clicks on your phone. And so even though I didn't use it on my phone ever to record an episode, I liked the ease of it. And I actually still use it, but I use other programs. I'll use some of the higher end programs like Adobe Audition, or I like Camtasia if I'm trying to do a quick edit. And then I just upload and distribute using Anchor. So it's a good one I recommend.
Yeah, I'm all about Anchor. I actually still use it after nearly 2 years. I don't always record in there. I actually record in Zencaster with my interviewees, and I love it because there's 2 tracks, and then I can edit it separately, and then I upload everything that I edit into Anchor. But I typically will do all of the pieces, like if I have an extra piece of information I want to toss in there in addition to my intro or my outro or whatever, like I'll just record that right in Anchor. For me, that's just been easier. And then also, there are times when I do have to record through Anchor because maybe I have a guest that can't get on Zencaster. They only have their phone. So it's a really great option for them to just be able to record through their phone in Anchor. It gives me 1 track, but it's allowed for a lot of different flexibility with my varied guests. So I definitely love it. I don't know, maybe it doesn't give you the best analytics if you're a person who's looking to grow that. But so far, user-friendly, and how it's helped me become to the degree that I am now as a user, it's been a really great onboarding tool.
Yeah, I'm always so interested to see because I've been a guest on a lot of podcasts, and it's always interesting to see what the platforms are. Most of the time, at least recently, it has been Zencaster, or it's been done through Zoom and just the audio has been pulled from that. And I always think, yeah, I'm not doing any of that. I'm sticking straight with Anchor because that's what has worked for me. And I mean, I could invest the time in it, but that's what has enabled me to be consistent and intentional about something for a year. My biggest problem was probably, I guess, in April. I'm like, I'm not real sure, since this is my first podcast ever. When do I shift to season 2? Like, is it after 50, or do I wait the full year, trying to keep track of all of that? Like I didn't know. But it's great to get like all of your perspectives. So Dan, were you going to add something?
I just wanted to say that one of the things I was kind of picking up on is everybody was talking about different, not just equipment, but the platforms that we use to record and to host. What's cool about podcasting is you can do it from any device, anywhere. I think what we just heard was you can do it from even your phone. And actually, I think people don't realize how powerful a cell phone microphone is. If you know about microphones and if you become a podcaster, you probably will find out sooner rather than later. What you want ideally is a microphone that'll pick up sound from right in front of it. And that's basically what we're all using, even Rachelle's earbuds. So earbuds are fine. A cell phone microphone is designed so that it picks up the sound right in front of it, and for the most part tries its best to block out the sound around it, like that ambient noise. So any device, anywhere. I just learned like something mind-blowing, which is how to actually do some sound editing on my Chromebook. So literally any device.
Yeah, I love that part.
Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, I was just going to say, having traveled and gone to conferences while editing podcasts, it's been really nice to just be able to use any device. You mentioned a Chromebook. In a pinch, if I had to, I could use my phone. And I know there was one time where there was connectivity issues. I was traveling, and I did actually have to upload using my phone. I uploaded the file to my Google Drive, then from my Google Drive up to Anchor because it wasn't syncing in the hotel room, and I had to hit the road and I had a deadline. And so it was adrenaline pumping, but it all worked out. It's really nice how all of these devices kind of synergize. And I love what you mentioned about the mic, Dan. Really, all of these mics will work. Just some are better than others.
Yeah, I had this lovely set, and then I had another earbud set, and that's the other one is the one I started to use when I was doing the Anchor. and the quality of it was so much better. And those were just cheap, probably $10, $12. And these are the Apple ones for the Mac. And then I think I probably have like 7 headsets here, because when I did the Vicki Davis one, I didn't really have a good one. So I actually got, I think, a Skype headset for it, because I think she did her recording through Skype. And so they're all different in the sound quality of it. And then with Dan, when we did our first episode, I had the great mic and I didn't have the headset. And so now I ordered a headset and it doesn't work with my computer. So I have several headsets here. It'll, I don't know. It's okay. It's a learning thing. But the other thing I couldn't figure out, and I don't know if any of you have done this that do use Anchor, is, and I want to welcome David. David, it's always good to see you and have you join in. And I've just been enjoying the dog that's behind you on your screen. But feel free to jump in the conversation too, with anything with podcasts. But if anybody that use Anchor, if you have done with the Anchor on the app on your phone, where you can have somebody join in with you and record, because I tried that and I couldn't hear, like I was talking a little bit and I could not hear the other person. The other person, I don't think they could hear me, but when I went back onto my desktop, there was like the awkward kind of conversation had actually recorded. So I don't know how that happened. If anybody else experienced it, it did not become a podcast episode because it did not work. But any ideas on that one?
I don't know why that would have happened, but I can tell you that I've used it. The sound quality isn't always the best, of course, when you can't edit, 2 tracks or whatever, the sound out. But I've had, I want to say, at least 10, if not more, of my episodes be interviews through Anchor on the phone. And they work really well. The last one, though, the frustrating part was like the track, however it mixed within Anchor, and then I can do nothing else, kind of like what happened to you, is that then we were talking over each other, and then that's really hard because then there's no way to like redo the edit on that. So that's kind of a bummer. But for the most part, it's not always my best option, but it definitely has worked several times successfully. So I'm not really sure what happened with the one for you, but
I don't know.
Try it again. Maybe you and I should try it. We'll just try it out.
I know. See if it happens. It never fails. Something that's supposed to be the easiest, it's going to work. It's seamless. And it just, you always have that one thing. It just doesn't work. So anybody else? Or David, have you done podcasts? Do you have your own podcast yet? Oh, wait, I have to. There we go. Asking to unmute.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've listened to a lot of podcasts, and I've dabbled in some myself. I've been listening a lot to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. There's so many different avenues for podcasts. There's so many different mediums. There's so many different ways for teachers to get involved. Something that I'd like to see. I'd like to see more teachers get involved. More educators get involved, because we all have different perspectives and we all have different experiences. There's so much to share. And a podcast is definitely a great way that we can, reach a different audience that we might not otherwise reach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And there are so many out there that it's just nice to have the variety, because you can really find, and there are some that are consistent. I get the notifications. So like Weston and Molly, they have their Teaching Keening podcast. And if anybody has listened to it, I love it, because there's always a TV show or a movie reference or something, and they play some clips with it, and the back and forth between them, it's always fun. It usually pops, I get the notification around the time I'm going for a walk. I also have a notification for Don Wettrick started up, and I really enjoy listening to those a lot of the time, because he would talk to students or people who are working on projects for innovation, and it was just something different for me that I was interested in learning more about. But I always, if people tag me and post on Twitter because the podcast, new episode, or friends invite me onto them, I really like to listen to a lot of those, because like you said, David, there's so much to learn and share. Even if you are like me talking to yourself, it's really good to think through some things. So any other comments on that before I ask you another question? Oh yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Something that David said kind of triggered this in my mind that I wanted to get out there. We talked a lot about education podcasts, but there are lots of other subject areas that podcasts are being produced for too. And some of them are very informational, some of them are historical, some of them are just purely entertainment. And so if someone is watching or listening right now and they haven't really dabbled in the world of podcasts, you could definitely find one on anything you're interested in. I actually work with someone who is an educator, but actually he's one of several co-hosts. I think they have like hundreds of them. No, it seems that way anyway. They do a show called the Mickey Dudes Podcast, and it's all about Disney and all things Disney and the Disney parks and the Disney resorts and everything. It's really cool. But I guess my point in all of this is that now, perhaps more than ever, and I think it was Rachelle who mentioned it before and got a big nod and a clap from Sarah. Like, self-care is a really big thing. You know, teachers and educators are super stressed out right now. And I'm thinking that maybe one of the ways that they can unwind and relax and take their mind off of education is to find one or several really good, like, entertainment type podcasts or something that appeals more to their interests outside of education.
I think that's a great point, Dan. I know when I need to engage in some self-care, I'm not looking for an educational podcast. I'm looking for something a bit comedic. Now, when they dovetail, that's really nice. Jonathan Spike had one, the Laugh Ed podcast. I recommend everyone check that out. I don't know if he's still producing it, but that is hilarious. It's like watching The Office, or you're rather listening to it, but the hijinks that happen, it's hilarious. You got to give it a listen. I don't want to spoil it for anyone. There are some really good episodes.
You know, Scott, it's so funny that you mentioned that, because I was going through my phone, which has, I think, more tabs open on it than my computer does somehow. There were somewhere around 105, and I just kept scrolling back through them today. And I still had his Google form open to, like, apply to be a guest on that podcast. And it made me think I had forgotten about that. And so now that you mention it, it's funny. I did enjoy listening to some of those episodes. So in the chat, Kathy Sue, there's the beer podcast. I forget what is it? I can't remember the name offhand. It's Beer EDU. And
Beer EDU.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Social Studies podcast is on there. And yeah, you're right. Whenever you can find one that kind of has all of those elements, or the self-care, honestly, out of all of my podcast episodes that I did, one of the first ones I did last year, and I'm not the greatest at this, but it was on 10 ideas for educators, but for anybody, for self-care. And as I read it and as I'm talking through it, I'm laughing, because they're, of course, disconnecting. Like, I can't, it's so hard for me to disconnect. But that was probably, I think that was the one that had the most listens when I had last looked. And I did another one more recently, and it was still focused on that. So even when I was on Catlin Tucker's The Balance, it was talking about, like, how do you balance so many different things? And it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, all of us that are here have so many things that we do. Like, how do you make time to find balance and self-care? And for me, it's taking the walk and listening to a podcast, or trying to record one with all of the noise in the background. And I don't have any fancy editing, so it is what it is. But I think one of you, was it Scott or Dan? I forget which one of you said, like, it doesn't have to be perfect. Or did I make that up? I feel like, was that you, Sarah, that said perfect? I heard perfect. I feel like I heard perfect like twice. Okay, so don't have to be perfect. And if you're listening to my podcast, not perfect at all. So other question I wanted to ask before we kind of wrap up here. Oh, Kathy Sue said, travel so much, listen in your car. Yeah, it's nice that it can be PD anywhere, everywhere. It's also good for students too, to kind of point them in a direction for a lot of different podcasts or student created podcasts. And that's actually what I was going to kind of move into. So, as teachers, we can create them. They're great for listening to, for just taking a break, for unwinding. They could be on any different topic. Great for reflection, to create our own. But having students to create them, like, what are some benefits, or have you done this, or do you have students in your schools that have done this? And, anything that you can share for anybody that's watching that's maybe been thinking about doing this.
I love when I've been able to help students podcast over the past few years. A couple of memories that come to mind. I haven't really been in my my own classroom too much the last few years. So as a coach, it's been me just supporting and overseeing the process. But I had a group of students who wanted a more creative way of showing what they had learned in their health class. And they created a podcast about mental health and dealing with stress. And it was 3 of them, and I'm not exactly sure if they had these nicknames to begin with or not, but they called it the Brains, Bulk, and Brawn podcast. And we actually put it out on SoundCloud, and I did some editing, and it was really fun. And then Rachelle, you could probably relate to this as a world language teacher. I helped some students in Spanish class last year record them, basically practice speaking conversationally in their second language and record it and listen back to it and hear how it sounded. And it is really a fun way and a great way for students to show what they've learned in class versus just writing it down, or what I think has become a little cliche, not to put anyone down, but it's not your typical create a Google slide presentation or PowerPoint presentation. There's a little bit more that has to go into it, and a little bit of a different angle that you need to put into it. And when I hear and I see students doing things like podcasting or vlogging, and they're on video, it really, to me, ramps up the level, the level of knowledge or higher order thinking, or whatever you want to call it. And so I really love when students get creative like that.
Yeah, it's so great. There's a student at my former site, Enoch's in Modesto. He owns a company called Rep Digital. And last year he was a junior. He was able to do his ROP course and go to his business and actually work. And he has a podcast related to the business side. So he uses the podcast as just kind of a draw into the business side, really, and a kind of fun side. Now, there is some explicit material on there in terms of verbiage. He cusses, the guests do use curse words. So it's not academically appropriate, but I love how he's getting out there and doing that. And he had on a few months ago, let me see his name, Patrick Lee, the co-founder and former CEO of Rotten Tomatoes. So he's getting on some top level guests on his show. I'm really proud of a student doing that. This student this year is a senior in high school, and I think that's amazing. And I've done that with my own students. Now, my students haven't reached that level of success. I've had them do sports podcasts, things like that, just something they're really interested and passionate about, and the outcomes have always been positive.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. Thanks for sharing. Sarah, anything?
I always wanted to do a podcast with my student, the principal, and I never did it. So, hey, at least I'm living large, and I've had a few of my former students on my podcast, but one that I wanted to mention is Hans and Jennifer Apple's award-winning Culture out of Canada. They have some amazing shows that those students have produced. It's been really fun to kind of watch them grow over the years. I mean, they had John Gordon on once, and he's one of my favorite authors. So I know they've had a lot of different guests. So that's a good example, I think, of one where you can have a wide impact as well if you're kind of guiding the students through it.
Yeah, I love that. There's just the sharing of like the podcasts that are out there. Oh yeah, that's another one. I mean, there are so many. I think I'd written a blog at one point, just gathering ideas of PD on the go, basically. What are some ways that we can keep on learning when we don't have all the extra time or weekends and summers off? And podcasts definitely was an option. Even joining in webinars now. I mean, with things like, Zoom, obviously you could just pull it up on your app and go for a walk or go for a run, whatever, and join in. But yeah, with my students, I had asked them for the STEAM course that I teach, it's 8th graders. And I asked them about doing a podcast, and a couple of them had some interest in it and then kind of got away from it. I even had the little mics where I said, you could just go and sit, I'll set you up with Anchor and you can kind of just interview each other and see how it goes. And I think they were kind of nervous about doing that. So that's definitely something I want to pursue again this year. Now, we're not in our classrooms, at least for the first 9 weeks, but of course it's something we have used since. And like I said, with students, to connect with students in Argentina and Spain, Also just to even leave each other messages, same thing like using Flipgrid. I mean, still just getting them to share ideas in some kind of format, whether or not it's podcasting. But of course, now that I've started my own and have been on some and just listening to them, it's one of my favorite things to do.
Talking about getting students to create and running student podcasts, there's the World Economic Forum, right? The skills that students will probably need in the future. And one of them is social influence. And I think that putting a camera or a microphone in front of a student at this point is actually preparing them for what potentially could be a very valuable and important part of their future. And I just wanted to say, over the summer, we do a summer camp that is run at a private school, and it's sort of an arts-based school. But the summer camp, I actually this past summer taught podcasting and sports broadcasting classes, and it was a lot of fun. And basically, we did it again, going back to the equipment. We used GarageBand to record. So on Macs, that's like a native program to the device anyway. And then just cheap earbuds that we ordered, with COVID and safety concerns. Every single camper got their own pair of earbuds, and we kept them in a little sandwich baggie with their name on it. So we didn't mix and mingle and have, people putting like someone else's earbuds in their ears. But it was great. And every week we talked about different topics and things. And it was quick. It was easy. It was something that they really enjoyed. Not everyone is comfortable in front of a microphone or a camera. That's obvious. But I do feel like, for the most part, the more people do it, the more comfortable they get. That's not to say that the first few times they hear their own voice, they're not going to really be weirded out by it, because that kind of happens to everybody.
Yeah, total. I mean, nobody ever likes to hear your voice. If you hear, whenever answering machines were still around or something, you play it back, you're like, that's not me. Or I would hear somebody would play my voicemail, please turn that off. I don't want to hear that. Or even in my classroom, and I caught myself a couple of times doing this, where if I recorded a video or did some lesson and they would be listening to it in the class, stop. And I thought, you know what, Rachelle, if you're doing that and showing them that you're embarrassed, like, oh, I don't want to hear my voice, and stop that, like, what kind of a model is that for them? They're not going to want to do it. So it was hard to kind of break away from that, because you do get, I don't know, I get that little kind of like shoulder shrug, cringe a little bit, like, oh, there's the voice. But we have to, because we want our students to do it too. So yeah, great points. Anything else that anybody wants to share? I want to be mindful of everybody's time, and anybody that joins in and watches later, great tips here. And I will share the contact information, podcast information in all of the description on the events page for the Thrive in EDU. So anybody can catch up with everybody who's here and find out more information. But any last tips, advice, strategies, anything that you want to share?
I would just add, piggybacking off of what you said, it's really important to model how to do this for your students. So give it a try yourself, put yourself out there, take a risk. The water feels fine, metaphorically speaking, and then encourage them and share your experience. Be real. If you hated it, share about that experience and why you hated it. And I love the data that Dan shared. I think that's really important. This really is a 21st century skill that our students, at minimum, need exposure to.
One of my podcasting buddies, and someone who I consider kind of the one of the godfather or OG podcasters, at least in the education space, is Kreiness. And he says this all the time: just hit record. Sarah said it before, like, it might not be perfect all the time. It might never be perfect. It's not going to be perfect the first 1 or 2 or 3 times you do it. But if you don't do it, if you don't dip your toes in the water, like Scott just said, it's obviously not going to happen. And if you wait for the absolute most perfect time to do it, it's probably going to pass you by. You're going to never feel like you're ready to do it. So, I'm definitely all about, like Scott said, take that risk, jump right in. I just came upon the 3rd anniversary, so to speak, of my show. So we've been going strong for 3 years. And, if something gets in the way, and I'd like to stay consistent with my release schedule, but something comes up, I don't release an episode. Otherwise, I try and stay as consistent as possible. But life happens sometimes, and it's just about trying to put yourself out there and just do it. Oh, now I went all Nike on you.
Dan was reading my mind. So my final thoughts, not the Nike piece, but just before that. So, making sure that you have a plan and to stick to it and all of that. But when it falls off, I think people tend to do something called pod fade because they either feel like people aren't listening, the numbers aren't growing enough. They're expecting to have this huge reaction to their episodes, and it doesn't happen right away. So you got to stick into it. I know I've heard a lot of people say the magic number is 100 episodes to get to maybe what your expectation of reaching people is. For whatever reason, you're motivated to reach people, right? And so that's another topic that we didn't really touch upon, but I think it's really important that if you really have a passion and you really have a message that you want out there to share, it takes time and it takes effort and it takes consistency. But I really believe that your messages matter. So I hope that if you are a person who's been thinking about it, that you'll reach out to any one of us to help you with that consistency, because I think that the world needs more stories and we need more voices.
That is a perfect ending. And I don't want to say anything after that because it wrapped it up so nicely, but you're right. The thing that definitely resonates with me is stories, and podcasting wasn't something I always did. I've been writing for the last couple of years, and a lot of the blogs and the books, and not just my story, but sharing others. And so there is so much power in that, because if it's just the one person, if you only get one listener and it's the one person that really needs that and then tells other people about it, I mean, that is making a difference. And that is not something I always realized, but I'm thankful that I've come to my senses a little bit more over the last couple of years with some things. So yeah, and 100 episodes. So I've got a little bit of way to go. But one of my most recent ones, I was like, wow, it had so many listeners. And then I realized something happened with it in Anchor, and it only took 17 seconds. So world's shortest podcast, but that's okay. I fixed it. It's all good now. But anyway, thank you all for joining in today. And for anybody who's watching after on the YouTube recording, hope you join every Wednesday, different guests, different education topics. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear about, let us know, and we will catch you next time.